Hey everyone, this is Val the Voice Johnson, and welcome to another edition of the Interludes podcast. I am always excited when I bring on talented and very brilliantly blessed people like the one the person I'm getting ready to introduce to you guys on today. Good gracious, he is an author, he is a musician, he is an entrepreneur, and the author of recently the book that I just purchased called Little Book of Big Reasons to Love America. I feel like this book is important today. If no other days, it's important today. And of course, we're excited to have Christian Ray Flores. Welcome. How are you, Christian?
I am very well, Val. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh my gosh. There's so many questions that's floating around in my brain, but then of course I think about all of the things that you have done. I want you to kind of introduce yourself to my audience, your background. When I say that when a person there was a song back in the 90s called Been Around the World and I. When I
Yes,
read you remember that song?
Lisa Stein
Stansfield. Lisa
Stansfield.
Stansfield.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, that's one of my
And
Mhm.
yes, that's a good song.
That's one of my favorite songs. So when I read your background, I was thinking, oh my goodness, that is going to be such a wonderful situation. And I was like, I'd love to ask these questions and to find out more about you. But here's the thing. You've had such a quite an extraordinary journey from Moscow. This is we're talking from Russia all the way to here. And here's the thing, how have all of these diverse cultures that you've
Yeah,
been a part of has influenced your music and ministry?
good question. So between Moscow and here,
Hmm.
there was Chile and Germany, then Africa, then back to Moscow, then Ukraine, and then to the United States. So this is my sixth country and my fourth continent. And a whole lot of stuff happened sort of in those in those places. A lot of drama. Uh, okay, so the question was music and ministry. I would
Hmm.
say, well, first of all, music, right? Because I was brought up completely atheist. Both my parents were Marxists, right? So like I didn't meet anyone who like didn't have a relationship or meet anyone or talk to anyone who believes in the divine until I was in my probably early 20s.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's a very different
Wow.
climate, right? Musically, it was a huge blessing to be able to have this Latin influence early on. Of course, we lived in Chile. I sang sort of natural. I had a natural tone, right? So that was sort of my only thing that I didn't have to learn was my tone.
Okay.
Even vocal, I think vocal technique I did have to learn later that I just didn't have it. I had a tone, but didn't have the technique. But anyway, I'm just going into like details now. But when I was growing up in Africa, we had this very strange uh, we had combination because we I was part of a Latin choir, like a kids that did all kinds of folk music from Latin America. So it's Brazil and Colombia and Argentina and Chile, things like that.
Wow.
And then at the same time, we were living in Africa, so we're exposed to these syncopated beats and African chants and it's just beautiful dancing and stuff like that. And then
Mm.
when we went back to Russia when I was a teenager, my parents got divorced, so I had to go. I went with my mom. Then there was this
Mhm.
whole European influence, right? Dance music, things like that. And I was in a jazz studio for a while, so that's where I fell in love with Ray Charles and uh, you know Al Jarreau and people like that, and George Duke, people like that,
Oh wow.
Chaka Khan, people like that, right? So that was sort of my exposure to jazz and soul and R&B. So I basically sort of landed on R&B pop as my style of choice, right? And then when I sort of came out, went into sort of the professional space musically,
Right.
all of
Mhm.
those very, very eclectic things sort of came together, and that's what made it unique, I guess.
Yeah, and I was on your IG and I saw a picture of you and Al Jarreau. You got a chance to meet one of your
Yeah,
heroes. How
yeah, a
was
few of
that?
them. Yeah, I
Yeah.
met El Giro after a show. We hang out together in an after party, and it was
Hmm.
just surreal. George Duke was an actual friend of mine. We actually did a joint project in LA,
Wow.
and I got to be literally share the stage with Shaka Khan at one point, and I was she was performing and I was performing after her, and she loved it so much she actually invited me over to her table and we like had champagne and talked for a long time. It's one of those things you go, is this really happening? Is this really happening to me? So yeah. So I got to
Yeah.
meet quite a few of my heroes. Yeah.
Of all of the heroes that you've met,
Yeah.
who was the one that stood out the most?
I think for me, I think George Duke,
Yeah.
because he was just not just a musician or a producer, but he sort of was an architect of style, right?
Yeah.
So and he
Hmm.
worked with people like Anita Baker and so many other people, all the way to Michael Jackson. He was a producer on Off the Wall, and I got to sort of ask him all these questions about the patterns that he saw of success of successful artists, what they had in common, okay. And I was like, okay, tell me the truth. Who was like a real problem to work with? So he shared
Everybody
those.
wants to know that.
Yeah, yeah. So he shared those secrets with me, and we traveled together. We did a presentation of an album in Moscow, so we traveled together. So it was a lot of fun. I got to spend a lot of time with him.
Yeah, and I always find this fascinating that a lot of R&B artists, especially African American artists, they are celebrated in other parts of the world when sometimes we're not celebrated at home. Did
Yes,
you ever
yes.
feel that way
Well,
about?
especially jazz. Jazz
Yeah.
is
Why?
massively more popular in Europe than it is in the US, which is it is perplexing actually.
Weird.
I don't know.
Hmm.
I don't know what the question.
Hmm.
I don't know why that is, but they are massive stars in so many places on Earth, and in the US they're just sort of okay, Al Jarreau, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Okay, Al Jarreau. This is Al Jarreau, like. So yeah, so yeah, but I was sort of my musical it was like the maturation of my musical tastes was definitely jazz and R&B for sure. So it shaped me
Yeah.
forever, so still
So
my
I'm assuming
preference.
that's what led to, and we're going back some years,
Yeah.
your big single that you had out. It was called Our Generation.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah,
had a
yeah. How did
string.
that come? How did that single come together, and how did you get started in your music career with that song?
Well, actually I didn't get started with that song. I had a bunch of hits before that.
Okay.
And basically so I started in the early 90s, and it was honestly the chances of me succeeding were very low because
Hmm.
I was this R&B pop hip hop kind of guy
Mm-hmm.
who was introducing this kind of music into a space that never had R&B pop and hip hop kind of stuff in the charts, right? It was sort of
Mm-hmm.
more underground music, right? That certain clubs, certain very like it was basically underground. So I made it mainstream in a significant way by mixing, the music, making it sort of more palpable to the post-Soviet ear, I guess, because it's
Okay.
the Soviet space is like 15 different countries that was used to be the Soviet Union, but they stayed in the same cultural almost like ecosystem, the same stations, TV stations, radio stations, etc.
Right.
So when I started doing that music, it was very much R&B, very much
Oh.
R&B. And then a lot of people were very skeptical of it, going, yeah, I don't think the Russians will get that. And I can give you an example of the barrier. So
Okay.
the barrier, for example, if you go on stage, most places in America, and you would tell the crowd to clap on the second beat, like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you go on the stage in Eastern Europe, you'll do this, and people clap on the first.
Oh,
That's a
different.
that's a cultural peculiarity. So they prefer sort of the on the beat clapping, right? And then if you go to some of the smaller countries that are much more, I would say, ethnic, right? For lack
There
of a
you
better word, like Armenia, Georgia, places like that, Azerbaijan.
go.
So you might not even know where they are, but they appreciate syncopated music. So I had a massive following, like in places like Kazakhstan, right? You know,
Wow.
yeah, the land of Borat, which is like it's not actually, what they show in Borat is nothing, it's not has nothing to do with Kazakhstan. But anyway, but but we did sports arenas in Kazakhstan, in places like that.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, but my point is, there's a musical taste and a musical aesthetic that is local, and then when I came on, um, most people were skeptical that it would actually gain traction, but it did. And I think it was because of the showmanship. We had great choreography, great dancing. We
Yeah.
it was just great music. And then after a string of hits, we had sort of that Our Generation one, which became this massive massive hit, like a mega hit. And it was
Yeah.
just it sort of captured the pulse of a generation. It was very bold, etc. So yeah, that's the backstory.
Yeah. And I wanted to kind of get the backstory of that because it is something that made you very popular at the time. And I
Hmm.
feel like when you start off, and I hear this from other musicians that have had like massive hits and stuff, it's then that transition of what do you do? What's next? If you
Hmm.
decide not to stay in the lane of music, where else do you go? And so I'm just wondering, like, you've managed this balance to be this pop star, you're an entrepreneur, and now ministry. Now,
Hmm.
my question is, when did ministry come into focus for you when you were still being a musician and going out and wowing everyone on different continents?
Well, I was at the peak of my career when I became a Christian, which is unusual. Usually
Mm.
people become Christians when they're tanking, right? They're desperate, you know.
You.
Yeah, but I was actually tanking. I was tanking emotionally, but I was at the peak professionally.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
I became a Christian December 95. So it was actually before that big hit. It was
Oh, okay.
yeah. So I was not even peaking yet, basically. I was peaking 96, you know.
There
Uh
you go.
but but uh but I was definitely massively going. It was like an explosive growth. And what happened was I became a Christian. I started really like reviewing everything about my life. I got a lot of mentorship, and a lot
Mhm.
of guidance, and it changed me so profoundly. And I'm sort of this. I'm a pretty radical guy in the sense that if I go, I go all in, you know. And
Yeah.
I was I was not shy about it. So I have like three magazine covers where I basically on the cover of the magazine say I'm a Christian. I have deep convictions about Christianity or something like that. Versions of that, like on the cover. And I got a lot of heat from the press and all kinds of people. People were like, "No way, this guy," because I had a reputation, like a very different reputation. Let's put it that way, right?
Mhm. There
So
you
people were
go.
like, "No way, this is like a phase. These artists, you know." So, uh, but I stuck with it, and but what happened when it comes to transitioning into other careers, and I hope that
Mhm.
speaks to your audience because sometimes you are in a career path and you get stuck there even though it's somebody else's dream, and I'll unpack what that means.
Mm.
You
Okay.
know, you maybe your parents wanted to do something, maybe your peers wanted to do something, maybe you're just having such success financially that even though you might feel a little bit misaligned or a lot misaligned, you're not going to switch away because you have this sort of reputation, the status to maintain, right?
Right.
Or even a spending
Mm.
habit, standard of
Yikes.
living, so to say. Yeah. So,
Mhm.
and I think most people, um, they they end up getting sort of staying on a lane that's no longer theirs for way longer than they should.
Mhm.
And we're just not honest with ourselves. We're just quietly miserable. And what I found is I have sort of one of my unfortunate perhaps gifts and fortunate in other ways, is that I'm completely incapable of staying with something that no longer excites me. And I was on a train ride, and I was going on tour on a train ride, and I remember very distinctly when I had that thought that I'm going from city to city and entertaining thousands and thousands of people, and my crew is with me. I think I was traveling with like 20 people or something like that at the time, so
Wow.
I had an entourage, right? And I was sitting alone in the car, in the train car, and I remember thinking, "Is this all there is for me?" And that thought was very intense, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And what it
Mm-hmm.
revealed is that I was grateful for the opportunities that I got. I was
Right.
living a dream that most musicians actually never reach, statistically
Right.
speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yet, this it is a dream life for somebody who all they want to do is do music their whole life.
Yeah.
But I realized I'm just not that guy. And I realized that there were some parts of me that were dormant. And, I was traveling throughout that Eurasian sort of space, 15 different countries.
Ooh.
But I was an international person. Like I grew up all over the world, and I felt claustrophobic in that space. I was like, this is getting super boring, basically. I was
Wow.
doing only music, but I was also wanting to raise a family, and I knew that raising a family would clash with the lifestyle, right?
There you go.
with
Mm-hmm.
with the constant traveling, and to me that had become a huge priority because I come from three generations of broken homes. I
Mm.
also have an economics degree. I have a master's degree in economics. I speak four different languages. None of those things were being utilized in that space where I was at.
Wow. Mhm.
So I was like, it's sort of embarrassing to acknowledge this, but I'm sort of bored doing this, and I don't want to be bored for the next 20 years, basically. So that's sort of was the initial, impetus. And I really wanted to do ministry because I felt that look, if I can entertain thousands of people and I don't change eternity for them in any way, shape, or form,
Mhm.
maybe I can use that same ability to preach the gospel and actually change eternity for some people. And to me, that was at the time very valuable because my life had changed so dramatically that I wanted to be
Mm.
able to give that to other people, you know. So anyway, that's sort of a long answer, but those are the nuances of the transition.
Yeah, and I think that people sometimes get pigeonholed and they figure they can't pivot because
That's
they
right. Yeah.
feel I'm known as this,
That's right.
you
And
know, whatever
and
that
all and
is.
exactly, and if you start something new, you're gonna start over. So you don't
Yeah.
have the status, the recognition, even the respect, perhaps. And what if you fail, right? So I think most people do not transition make those hard decisions,
Mhm.
even though in the long run they would have probably been much happier, more fulfilled, and maybe even more successful if they did make that jump.
Yeah. And I think ultimately your story is inspiring because you made the pivot, you turned.
Yeah,
And I think what's so remarkable is how all of the things that you've learned as a musician, as someone that's touring, I feel like you bring it all to
yeah.
your podcast headspace. You bring it to your writing, and definitely you brought it to your ministry. You met your wife, Deb. When did you guys meet, and how did you all meet?
We were in LA,
Mm-hmm.
and I was invited to a conference. It was called the AMS World Tour, and it was basically and creatives, artists, athletes, Christian athletes from all over the world met in LA for
Mm-hmm.
this big conference. I was performing, I was speaking, and she was part of that ministry in Los Angeles, and she worked in MTV, VH1, so she has this creative background as well, right? So she's a
Mm-hmm.
theater major, etc. And you know, she was one of the organizers, and she was asking me for my info because they were going to introduce me on stage. I was performing at the Pantages Theater, which was really fun, and it was like a legendary place. They used to do the Oscars there, right? And
Oh, excuse me.
yeah, I know, yeah, in Hollywood, it was fun. And so she was asking me for my info, and she was gonna walk away, and I was like, hey, so what do you do? So tell me about yourself. And that's sort of how it happened. And I like instantly had a connection with her, like honestly, instantly. And somebody had set me up on a blind date with a couple other uh, ladies, and I canceled everything. And I'm like, I'm gonna pursue this one. I didn't have enough time, so I had to like make a decision and press in. And that's what we
Because
did.
when you're in, you're all in, like
I'm
as you
all
said
in,
earlier.
exactly. Yeah. And then I wrote to her because there was no Skype at the time. It was dial-up time,
Mhm.
right? It was the 19th century still, the 20th century, from the last century. So I emailed her every day until she moved to Moscow.
Wow. So she left the States to come to
She did.
you.
Yeah, she did. Yeah.
Wow. That's love. And I'm assuming you all got married afterwards.
We got married, yes, in Moscow. We had 1,800 people at our wedding.
What? Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah, there was a
Oh,
lot of people there.
I'm wow. And and you know what? I'll get your thoughts on what's happening over there right now. And I kind of had to have someone kind of break things down about the Ukraine Russia conflict.
Yeah,
Not going to get into it right now, but in my mind, I was just thinking how beautiful to have a wedding in Moscow where
yeah,
it's I can just imagine and see how beautiful it is.
yeah,
So
yeah.
definitely, definitely. But the the book,
Yes.
the little book of Big Reasons to Love America, a love letter from an immigrant. I was going through this book and just loving, number one, I'm very visual. I love the photos, I love the colors. And your book features a lot of powerful quotes, including one from one of my favorite orators, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., about the church being the consciousness of the state. How do you see
Mhm.
yourself as serving as a conscious with your family, your ministry, and the broader community?
I think that I love that quote very much because I think what
That's
it
why it's in the
does
book.
because it's because there's basically these two camps essentially, right, in America. And
Mhm, mhm,
one is really more about, that the this is a Christian nation,
mhm.
all of that stuff, right? Which it was never a Christian nation actually.
Ah.
Now, it was never founded as a Christian nation. Now, there's a difference between it being founded as a Christian nation and the cultural DNA being very, very Christian. I think there's a difference there because and then the other side argues separation of church and state, which is definitely there from the original, from the get-go, right? And I
Right.
think both can be reconciled by this quote.
Ah.
The the idea that this is a this is a nation that has been built on Christian principles. 100% true.
Mhm,
Cultural
mhm.
DNA, I call it, right? Collective consciousness.
There you go.
100% true. And if it wasn't for that DNA, if it wasn't for that consciousness collectively, this cultural texture, America would not be America. It's just a very different country. On the other hand, it is a country that was founded on the separation of church and state. And the reason for that is because the founders didn't want one group, one religious group, to take hold of the political power and lord it
Mhm.
over other religious groups.
Right.
That was the motivation, right? So it was never meant. It was never meant to be governed by a theological elite, so to say. You know.
Okay.
So I think when Martin Luther King, what he says, I think it reconciles both sides of the argument, where it says, yes, but the church, the collective of
Mhm.
Christians of all kinds, they need to speak as the consciousness of the state. They need to speak truth to power, which is exactly what MLK did. And
Yeah.
so I think it's absolutely necessary and important for Christians to speak the truths of Scripture, the principles of the governing laws of the universe to the political powers, right?
Yeah.
And the political powers should listen to that, and if they listen to that, they will guide the country into more prosperity, more flourishing, more peace. So that's sort of my contention on that issue.
Yeah. And you do you feel like you are serving as a conscience for your own family and also the community that you serve?
Well, I hope so. I mean, one of the things
Mhm.
that we're not put here to just to teach a theological sort of concept. We're put on earth to love people. And I
Yeah.
think collectively as a church, that's what we do, right? If we show up and we love our neighbors and we practice hospitality and we serve the poor, um, that's what we do, right? And
Mm-hmm.
when there's conflict and when there's hatred, we love our enemies. So we leaven society with that kind of heart. And I do feel that that's a massive strength of America. America is very faith-based. It really, truly is.
Yeah.
And that's one of my observations in the book. Is one of the chapters is about, look, this is Christianity is still alive and well in America, 100%,
Mm-hmm.
and it's
Yeah.
been attacked quite a bit,
Oh, it has. It
but
has. Mm-hmm.
it is more alive and well than most other developed countries in the West, for
Yeah.
sure.
Very much so. And you get a chance to interview some very powerful folks on your podcast, Headspace.
Yeah,
And it's been running for a couple of years now. You've had some excellent interviews on there. What
yeah.
inspired you to start it? And what are some of the most impactful stories or moments that you've experienced in doing your podcast, Headspace?
Well, I one of the things that I do now is I do probably too many things, right? So I've been a, sort of bivocational for a long time, trivocational, quadvocational, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I do, we run an after-school academy in Mozambique, in Maputo, which is where I grew up. So
Wow.
if you're in the audience, if you want to help us help kids get faith, education, computer literacy, and English, go to Ascend Academy, ascend.academy. That's the website. So that's one of the efforts that we have, and it's been incredibly just very fulfilling, right? It's a small project, but it's
Mm-hmm.
transformative for the kids in Africa. And the I have a digital media company called Third Drive Media, and then I'll have a coaching program called Exponential Life. And
Something too.
so the podcast is really connected to Exponential Life primarily because I've had a lifelong fascination and love for the secrets of human flourishing.
Mm.
Like, and so part of the reason even for the book is what's the environment that helps people flourish. And the argument I make is that America somehow miraculously figured out an environment where a lot of people can flourish compared to other nations.
Right.
So the coaching is me now going on a micro level and helping people, taking people personally, one on one, and coaching them in flourishing in both professionally, spiritually, in family, in finance, all of those areas. So the Headspace podcast is my way of learning from either people who are top experts. So let's say I interviewed the top expert on growth mindset, which is sort of a buzzword and everybody's now talking about it. He's like
Yeah.
the guy in research in the world. So I've interviewed him and I get to ask him all kinds of questions, learn from him, and
Mm-hmm.
then sort of take notes myself. So I get to grow through interviewing some of the smartest people out there,
Mm-hmm.
um, sort of brain scientists, people like that. So people that are more in research, academia. Sometimes it's physical development, spiritual development, things like that, or people who I think have gone through a journey of human flourishing that have overcome big obstacles and have found their calling, their success. So people that have done really well in the business world, but they also have this other dimensions that people that I respect. So I sort of ask them questions about Okay, how'd you do it? How'd you deal with failure? How'd you deal with rejection?
And
What was the worst thing
mhm.
that happened to you? Okay, what are the secrets of overcoming these things, right? So I just love doing that because I get to learn from some extraordinary people, just absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah. And I think we can all learn, especially in being in this, I want to call it interview podcasting space, from the folks that we bring on our platforms. Because when I was going through the research and looking at a lot of your interviews, and I learned about your coaching program as well, I was thinking, wow, this is the long journey. You have the musician who's
Hmm.
pivoted into being a minister, who's pivoted into being a motivational speaker, who is now actually getting out there and still helping and being in ministry with community and helping other communities that you were a part of as a child, which is always good to never forget where you come from,
Yeah,
which is
exactly. Hmm.
amazing.
Hmm.
I love that. With your diverse experiences, what legacy do you hope to leave your three daughters, and what would you like to be remembered for most of for your life and work?
That's a big question. I honestly, I would love for my daughters to know that I'm someone who has strived to do the assignment that was given to me
Mm-hmm.
with great love,
Ah,
in helping other people. So, and I think
yeah.
that's really the secret of happiness is what is your assignment? Why are you here?
There you go.
You know, and then doing that with all your might, right? And I think most of us shrink away from that because it's a scary question to
It
answer.
is. It is.
Because the assignment is always a little bit harder than you think, or maybe a lot harder than you think. Than you believe in. You don't believe in yourself that much, but
Mm-hmm.
when you find out, you then are stretched to trust that this is your assignment and give it your all and you grow through it and you serve others through it. And I just love people. I love it. If I coach people, my goal is to see them flourish, be transformed, transcend their own, what they believe is possible for them. That's basically my aspiration.
Yeah. And the scripture that comes to mind is, I can do all things through Christ
Hmm.
who strengthens me. So I feel that when people talk affirmations, I'm like, the best affirmations come from the Bible.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
you want to
Yeah.
you want to affirm, just go to the Bible. I feel
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that's the best place to go. Oh my gosh. There's just so much. And I think that our community with Interludes would just love to know more and more about what you do, where they can find you, and how they can get their hands on the little book.
On the little book.
If people want to find out more about your ministry and your to book you, either even for speaking or to
Yeah.
be and learn more about Headspace, where would they go?
So, for the book, you just go on Amazon and plug in my name, Christian Ray Flores, or if you don't remember the title, Little Book of Big Reasons to Love America. Everybody's like, it's a mouthful, but it works. But so you can look it up in a heartbeat, you'll find it. If you feel like, hey, I really want to get more inspiration on a regular basis, go to my Substack newsletter. It's christianrayflores.com. It's my newsletter. I drop 2 posts a week. One is free. The other one's for those generous souls who want to support our work and our subscribers for
Mhm.
like $11 a month. And uh, and that's a special post on Wednesday mornings rather. And
Mhm.
uh, and then look, if you want to book me, you can just go to exponential.life without the E, starts with an X. And I'm speaking at churches, I'm speaking at conferences now. So I'm sort of beginning to do more speaking this year because I'm letting go of a couple of endeavors that were stretching me a little bit too thin. So I have a little bit more space this
Mhm.
year and going forward. And that same website, exponential.life, is the coaching website. So you can see the program, the kind of people we help, and listen to some testimonials and see if it's a good fit for you.
Excellent. Excellent. Christian Ray Flores, it has been an honor to have you here with the Interludes podcast. Thank you so much for joining us on today.
Val, thank you. It's good to speak to someone who has been a true professional for decades and decades. You've told me a little bit about your origin story as well, and it's fun to reminisce about the good old days when you could edit with analog tape. That's OG, man. That's fantastic stuff.
Telling my age, but it's okay. I like it.
Embrace it, Val. Embrace it.
I'm embracing it all. I'm Val the Voice Johnson, and this is the Interludes podcast. That's the official end.
That's
Yay.
good. That's good.
I end all of the